You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Knezik.
Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Knezik, and welcome to episode 146. And we have another guest that we can't wait to talk to today. So
I can't believe we didn't leak this. I can't believe we didn't say it.
You're right.
Maybe I thought it was too good to be true, and I thought I would jinx it.
Yeah.
If I said it to her.
So, and I was going to say there, Fran, so I'm not going to let Fran talk too much before I just get right into the introduction and say that we're really honored to be joined by Dr. Daniela Shebitz from Keene University. And like we've already recorded this, and you guys don't know this, but like our next episode, Dr. Shebitz has a really unique story of how she got into ecology and the ecological world as well. So I want you to start there and kind of say, what got you interested in all this, and how did you get to where you are now? What was your path?
Thanks. Well, first, I'm really excited to be here. I listened to you guys for so long, and I'm just honored to be a part of your podcast, and really looking forward to this. So I've been in New Jersey now 17 years, which is insane to even think about. I grew up I'm from the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and then grew up mostly north of there in the suburbs. And became very disconnected from nature as a kid, as so many of us do. And then I had a mother who found herself really frustrated with all the litter that she was surrounded by. And so she would spend her weekends picking up litter on the side of the highways, on the side of the roads. And I was just always so embarrassed by her, which is an awful thing to say because now I'm that mother who's crazy on the side of the roads picking up litter. But yeah, so she really kind of put the bug in my ear that said, this is not okay. And of course, living in suburbia and growing up as a child of the late 70s, 80s, and watching the little patches of forest that remained kind of be cut down to turn into housing developments really traumatized me as a child. So I also went through a middle school crazy period where my life was happening to me as a teenager. And so my family's answer was, well, let's travel and let's explore so that I didn't think the whole world revolved around middle school. And so in doing so, I got to see different cultures around the world, and my family's Israeli. I spent a lot of time in Israel growing up, and really got to see how different cultures interacted with their environment in a different way. And so by 8th grade, I remember writing a report that said I wanted to be a biology professor when I grew up. I wanted to also work for Greenpeace and save the whales and basically become an eco-warrior. And that really kind of has been my path since then. So, so I've been kind of bringing forward this uniting love of both humanity in terms of cultures that really understand and respect the environment, and also the environmental conditions as well, specifically plants. And so really kind of uniting those in the world of ethnobotany.
I find it interesting. I believe the story was when we had Jason on from NYRP. That's kind of how Bette Midler started NYRP, was picking up trash along the side of the road and being so upset about the amount of litter on the roadsides. And that kind of kickstarted her. It's just so nice hearing those stories. Can you talk a little bit about what you do at Keene University and what you specialize in, what your specialties are?
Absolutely. So right now I am the chair and a professor in the Department of Environmental and Sustainability Sciences at Keene. So I am, by training, I'm an ecologist, specifically also restoration ecology and ethnobotany. So my background in research has to do with how indigenous cultures use plants for, actually, my master's and PhD were with basketry plants and trying to restore culturally important landscapes using traditional land management practices. And so I have really built a career kind of looking at the effects of land management on plant diversity for the positive, and also for the negative. And so looking at that interactions between people and their landscapes. And so now that I'm living in urban New Jersey, a lot of my work has to do more with trying to foster those connections between people and their urban environments. So a lot of it comes back to urban agriculture, or right now I'm working with a amazing nonprofit nearby, Groundwork Elizabeth, on planting microforests in the area, and kind of looking at how we could densely plant forests to foster native biodiversity, but also to help with stormwater absorption and pollutants and air quality. So my work more in the urban parts of New Jersey has to do with kind of reconnecting people with nature. But I also have been spending a lot of time over the past 17 years in the Pine Barrens and working on a lot of the restoration of the Atlantic white cedar swamps there, monitoring those changes, and also on fire adapted systems, playing with, some of those fire adapted plants too. So I'm all over the map, but I fully have fallen in love with New Jersey. And so I'm trying to find all of the different ways that I could kind of connect people with their environments, no matter where we are.
One of the beautiful things about being based in New Jersey is all the different types of areas that you're dealing with. You have plenty of urban areas. You have the Pine Barrens. You have marsh and salt marsh ecosystems. You have Ridge and Valley up in the Water Gap. You have Piedmont. You have Coastal Plain.
And maybe the most important part of that is that they're all within like a 2 hours drive.
Yes.
You aren't having to go, all the way across the state here is 2-3 hours away instead of 10 like you get to have out west. So
I would imagine, and this is something that as we've progressed with the podcast, and I guess I've been more enlightened, that I struggle with is, what is land management? You're dealing with urban ecosystems. You're dealing with the Pine Barrens. And then when you go through history of how people have managed land, I don't really know what proper land management is at this point. And I would imagine a lot of people feel that way. As humans, do we know what land management is? Do we have a grasp on that? Is it something that we knew and we lost, or is that something that we have to relearn as things change?
Wow. Terrific question, and very important. And understanding that we now have 8 billion people on our planet, and we have many who do identify as, we have, I think it was something like 300 million that are identifying, and don't quote me on that, so as indigenous in some respect. And so a lot of indigenous cultures have evolved in the same areas where they are now, and have a sense of land management as one in which they connect to the land in a way that is respectful and in a way that is more of a relationship, as a familial relationship, as opposed to one in which humanity dominates over the land. And so if we ask, have people forgotten, or if we even know what land management is nowadays, I have to say it's very different depending on the society and where you are, both in the world and who you are interacting with. I'm inherently an optimist, so I do want to think that it's not all lost, that our knowledge of how to live and work with the land sustainably is not lost. But I think it really depends on how we perceive it, right? So are we perceiving the land as something that is there for us only in terms of natural resources, right? So is the water our resource? Is the soil our resources? Are the plants our resources? Or are they our relatives? And are we there to kind of foster their health? And likewise, are they there to foster our own health? And so that really does dictate how we manage that land. And there are many ways in which sustainable land management is still practiced now, right? So even regenerative agriculture is a way of sustainably managing land. Restoration, as an amazing field of science, is also a great way of integrating land management and making sure that you're increasing native biodiversity. But in a lot of it, unfortunately, what we see is not at all that, right? So a lot of it is sort of that creation, or the idea that the land is there for us. And it's very anthropocentric in that respect, as opposed to ecocentric. And so we're really kind of, unfortunately, shifting way too much into the anthropocentric world, where we believe that we are at the center of the universe. And we don't realize how inextricably linked our own health is to the health of our environment.
I think, in a small way, you want to bridge that gap. In a small way, we like to think that the podcast helps people on that journey to get there. Not that it solves everything for them, but it helps them take the first step. And I apologize if I get too deep right off the get-go. What you said, I know it can differ, theories of land management based on culture. And I guess one of the more unique things about being in the United States is it's a melting pot of cultures. And it makes me wonder if it's more of a gap in culture or if it's a gap with a oneness with nature. And I was curious with your experience with land management throughout the world, if it differs in other countries compared to this one.
Wow. Okay. So first of all, I do want to say just because someone immigrates to an area does not mean they lose that connection to the land, right? And so I think it's really, as I have moved around the country and around the world, I think it's very important to know that you could inherently take that love and connection with our planet with you. So that is a really important point that I think I just want to kind of say. We do live in New Jersey, which is one of the most diverse states in our union, and we definitely have people from all over the world. And how amazing would it be if we all kind of treated our own environment with the same lens of respect? So I will say, one of the things that I've been working on lately is a reflection of my time in Costa Rica. I was fortunate to do about 10 years of research in Costa Rica in the northern zone, which is just by Nicaragua's border. And Costa Rica is a country that does not have a military. So they've invested all their money into education and into the environment. But somewhere in the 1970s, they were looking at a country that had lost 75% of their forest. And what they decided to do is to kind of bring back as much forest as they can through a few different strategies, right? So one is, let's protect as much as we can of the old growth forest. So they set up this system of protected areas, and they basically said, okay, let's have that be protected. Kind of like our national park system. They also put in something called payments for ecosystem services. So they actually said, we have to give people that financial incentive to try to keep their forest so that we don't cut it down. So why don't we pay them for the services that the environment is providing if it's left intact? Because you can imagine if you are a farmer in Costa Rica who wants to plant pineapple, you are losing a lot of money if all of a sudden you can't clear that forest. And so they actually paid landowners for the values that their environments were having intact as intact systems. And then the third is through ecotourism, right? So they also are making a lot of money to save the forest through those the zip lining and all of the wildlife adventures and all that. So those different approaches really works to kind of keep the forests intact. But what my work is looking at is, but what about the land management that we need in there? So I work with local communities who have been in this area for a while, and they need to continue to harvest their medicinal plants from these forests. And some of the forests are not protected under the protected areas umbrella because they're young forests. They're growing up after agricultural use. And so we call those secondary forests. And sometimes those secondary forests have a lot of medicinal use. A lot of medicinal plants. They have actually sometimes even more diversity than the older growth forests for some of the plants that are used. So I think it's very important to incorporate land management into the protective strategies, right? So I'm trying to work to try to advocate for secondary forests to get just the same protections as primary forests. And it's a little bit different there because they don't have the invasive species that we have in so many of our secondary forests. But the idea that you can incorporate local knowledge and medicinal value into trying to develop these conservation or land management strategies, I think is really important. So Costa Rica is a great example of a country that's doing so much right and still has a way to go. But there are places all over the world where land management is really in a form of abuse of humanity and of our planet too. And so we need to learn from each other in a way that is cross boundaries and kind of looks at the world as a whole.
All right, I'm about to go all over the place.
I knew it was coming, friend.
Could you see my look in my face? I know. I just wanted to mention real quick because you mentioned about people being paid preserve. I think it was I can't remember the name of the awards. It's the one done by the royal family where they award I think $1 million to five different causes every year globally towards providing good ecological function. I think it was like Peru was one of the recipients because they were paying residents to do restoration on their own properties. So trying to get them where they profited from doing the right thing, and they put together a great system that allowed people. And I think it was Peru, but I can't remember. Which I just thought was a really good way of thinking out of the box to get people invested in it. But when you're talking about old growth, it made me think of a conversation that Tom and I have had, and I agree it's important to protect old growth. And you kind of touched on this, but like we're always talking about succession and successional forests and how important that is. So do you have to focus on all of that and not just one? Is it wrong to just do old growth? Like, not saying they're not important, but you need that succession for diversity. So
brilliant question. And one that is very location specific, right? So in a place like New Jersey, we have very little old growth left. And I think here we need to definitely make sure that we conserve what is there, what remains. In a place, so again, I'm going to travel to a different part of the world where I worked, which I worked on my doctorate in the Pacific Northwest, which on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. And my work was with the Native Americans who lived there, the Quinault and the Skokomish, and trying to reconstruct the historical land management of that area. So how did they maintain a whole matrix of different stages of succession, right, in order to get the resources that they needed in order to foster diversity there, and what effects did that have on the environment? So to answer your point exactly, Fran, I think it's that there are places there where people historically burned prairies frequently, every year or two. And then there were savannas intermixed in there where the burning was not as frequent. Trees were allowed to grow. And so the trees that were there grew very, very big and kind of provided shade. And from those savanna type of habitats, they would get nuts and provide shelter for a lot of game animals. In the prairies, people collect a lot of basketry plants, a lot of medicinal plants and food plants. And then there were forests where they didn't burn at all. And so those provided refuge and different habitats and different resources. And so you really kind of look at the idea that you've got this mixture of resources, and I don't like necessarily the word resources, but in this case it is, right? Different food crops, different medicinal crops, different basketry plants, and different habitats for different game that they were able to get from these different stages of succession, and did so in a way that we were able to see from aerial photographs from the early 1920s that were taken of this area. So we were able to piece together history by looking at these photographs and saying, wait, we know that without anthropogenic or human-set fires, this would all be forest. Mm-hmm. And here we're seeing clear forests that are mixed with prairies and mixed with savannas. And so there was this diversity of habitat types. And those existed until people were forcibly removed off of their land in the 1850s onto reservations in the area, and burning became illegal. And so they weren't allowed to maintain these habitats through burning anymore. And with that loss of burning became a loss of diversity in the area. And so part of my work was to try to reconstruct the landscapes that were there and to try to bring back some of the savannas specifically.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Do you think that there's still a good understanding of, obviously there's groups and education on why prescribed burns are important for diversity and other things. Do you think we truly understand that the need of that, and it's being used as much as it should be? Or do you think that it's still being wielded with like a soft touch, like we can do it here, like it's not? Yeah. Are we afraid of this? Is this something?
Yeah, of course we're afraid of fire, but I also am a little bit of a pyromaniac. I think it's kind of exciting to kind of see it return to places where it's been, withheld. I think it's It is scary because we're living in a different type of climate than was historically here, right? And so we are not 100% sure how fire is going to act on our landscape now when we start to reintroduce it, but we have to. So prescribed fire is an important part of restoration now for so many reasons. One, we have a lot of habitats that have evolved with frequent fires that were low in severity, and fire was withheld. So when the Europeans settled here, they were petrified of fire, right? There were any fires that were there were immediately put out, and they considered the Native Americans to be savages who were trying to burn their land, and didn't understand that. So actually, Smokey the Bear, or Smokey Bear, was the most successful advertising campaign in U.S. history, right? Because all of a sudden, people know, wildfire must be awful because Smokey is telling me so. And it got the whole country on board and trying to put out wildfires. And so we've done such a good job of suppressing fires that now we've seen decades of brush building up, getting, falling, and things that should have been burning regularly are no longer burning. So we have decades of dead wood that has accumulated in our forests, where they used to maybe be much more open, as in a savanna habitat. And so what we're seeing is a different landscape, right? So yes, I think that reintroducing fire to those landscapes that evolved with fire is very, very important. But we have so much more understory now. We have so much more dead wood, and we have drier and hotter conditions. And so there's a whole science that's trying to look at how do we do that? How do we reintroduce the prescribed fire in a way that can foster biodiversity and allow it to return and foster recycling of nutrients, but at the same time does not risk catastrophic wildfires being, kind of taking over, as we're seeing, unfortunately, so often.
Just to emphasize your point there, I have friends of mine, I'm not naming names, or people I've talked to, I should say. I'm not going to name names, but they say that Smokey the Bear is probably I shouldn't say probably, they've said is the worst thing to happen to some native habitats across the country. Just that absolute fear of fire. And even I jokingly, when my wife, son, and I went camping over the summer, she wanted to take a picture of like the Smokey the Bear sign, and my son at the end. I'm like, no, he's not allowed to. We can't support him.
I'm getting him a Smokey the Bear stuffed animal.
I think we still took
with.
the picture. At the end of the day.
Over the years, I've gotten a whole slew of Smokey Bear clothing from people. Yeah.
I think it's funny because we talked about like how we've moved away from land management in that way, but technically we've unintentionally practiced land management in a negative way by introducing things that have affected our forest. When you think of the loss of chestnuts and now the loss of ash trees, and we're having issues with oaks in New Jersey, and you think of elms and all these pathogens and diseases that we brought in from other countries, they've had an impact on our forest too, and we've changed them whether we want it to or not for the positive or negative. So it's silly to think that we shouldn't manage natural areas because everything needs stewardship. So we have all these changes that occurred whether we wanted them or not. I guess for our listeners that don't know, if you had to give like a 5-minute college presentation on succession for someone to understand it, how would you describe it?
So succession is the recovery of an ecosystem after a disturbance, right? So that could happen after a very low severity disturbance. So let's say you have a storm or even a clear cut that kind of takes away the trees, right? And so you're left with very fast growing grasses and some flowering plants like forbs, we call them, right? So you've got some early successional plants there that eventually maybe a decade, maybe 2 decades is going to be replaced by shrubs, and those shrubs will have berries and will start to attract different animals there that need those berries, and then some fast growing trees will be in there as well. And then those fast-growing trees will eventually be replaced by slower-growing trees that are more shade-tolerant, and kind of with that, they change the entire landscape into a forest. Now, all along there, it's not just the plants that are changing. It's the soil nutrients that are changing. You have nitrogen fixing plants that come in soon after a disturbance to try to reintroduce nitrogen to the soil. You have a whole different of soil biota that are there, and you have a lot of other animals that kind of need those different stages of succession. So you definitely do have some birds that like early successional habitat and some birds that love late successional habitat. And also some mammals as well in each of those stages. So that's after a light disturbance. We call that secondary succession. If there's a severe disturbance, like let's say a catastrophic wildfire that destroys all of the soil down to the bare rock, and there's no soil left, there's no seeds left in the soil, and this is what we're seeing all over the West, where fires are just getting so severe right now, is that those sites might not ever recover, or if they do recover, it will take hundreds of years to get back to that level of diversity that was in those forests. And so what you're looking at is you have to first build up the soil, right? And then you have to and that takes the process. And then the nitrogen fixers have to come in, and that is called primary succession. Primary succession isn't only a response to catastrophic wildfires, but it's also whenever you have new exposed soil. So maybe glaciers have receded. Maybe you have lava from a volcano that has melted. So you really have to start over. And what you're looking at is a process that takes very, very, very long. We see secondary succession all over New Jersey, right? So when trees come down because of a storm, when there are, so when people clear cut and they walk away, or when there's an agricultural field, a farmland that becomes abandoned, what happens there is succession or changes in the environment. But when the soil is intact, it could happen pretty rapidly. One of the jobs of restoration ecologists, and what you guys help out with so much at the Pinelands Nursery, is to try to accelerate succession, right? So how can we not just wait for it to take 100 years or 200 years? How can we plant the species that are going to be needed in each stage of succession so that they could kind of be there to help speed succession along, right? And so we're not losing a lot of that habitat in the meantime. And so if people abandon their agricultural fields, right? Yes, and we leave it alone, it could take a while to turn that into a forest. But if you're an ecologist and you want to start bringing back some of those older forests, you need to help a little bit, right? Yeah. So we have to plant in those trees.
I feel like I should.
Fast.
I deserve a diploma now.
Yeah. So I was going to say, what do you say to people who they say, hey, you know what, we should just let nature take its course. We have this forest or we have this farm field, just let it be and then let nature do what it wants. Do you think that's the right approach, or what would you say to them?
I think, again, it depends, right? There are places where that might happen, where you wouldn't be overloaded with invasive species and kind of, I do have to say, actually, if invasive species come in, succession could be completely stopped in many areas, right? So if you do leave a farm field and you say, let's say what happens, and then a whole bunch of invasive species come in instead of our natives, they might make it so that no native trees could even become established in that area. They could alter the soil chemistry. They could change the soil nutrients. They could change everything about the site. And so it depends where you are. If you are in New Jersey and you just let nature take its course, chances are pretty good that we're going to be seeing a whole mess of invasive species there. And so as a restoration ecologist, I want to think that, yes, it would be great if we could save all this time and money, but at the same time, not only would, we'd be out of jobs, more importantly, I think the places would just stop. I think that we would not see a lot of places in, especially more urban areas of New Jersey, have any semblance of native plant diversity, especially when you bring deer into the mix as well, right? And so a lot of the areas have to be protected and nurtured, and whether it be soil amendments, whether it be erosion control, whether it be removing invasive species and planting natives, all of that kind of is all hands on deck for places that we think has the potential to have great ecological value.
It's funny. We just talked to a guest that's not going to air till after we air yours, so no one's heard it yet. And, I didn't even think about it. He was talking about restorations in Wyoming. And I was thinking, oh, well, you don't have an issue with invasives. He's like, no, even though this is all sage, if you disturb the ground, the first thing that's going to come in is invasive cheatgrass, and you completely lose. And I didn't even occur to me. I'm thinking, oh, you don't have the same issues. And he goes, oh, no, we have the same issues. It's just in a different scenario.
Some different species, different habitats. It's
Unfortunately, invasives are universal right now, right? So even though they're different species, because people travel all over the world all the time. We're constantly transporting seeds. We're constantly transporting things are getting traded in places where they should not be, and we're losing habitats everywhere.
So let's take it one step deeper, if we haven't already gotten deep enough. So I think in order to kind of comprehend land management, you have to have some sort of connection with nature itself. And I kind of asked you this about land management, but it goes the same with human connectivity. And I know we kind of talked about different cultures just because you leave. My wife is from a farm in southern Poland, and she has a connection with nature that I'll never have, even though I work with it and appreciate it. It's different. It's just, I think, upbringing and how she was brought up with the land.
Yep.
Is the secret of human connectivity lost? Kind of like I look at the ancient pyramids that people built and no longer know how it happened. Are we so far removed from natural land? And some of it was done by our own government, to disconnect people from nature. Is so much of that lost that we can't rediscover parts of it?
So again, I'm an optimist who would hope to think not. But it is very easy to become disconnected. It's too easy, right? So looking at people who grow up in rural parts of the world, they understand inherently that link, right? So if they're not getting what they need from their environment, their own health is going to suffer. In urban areas, we've lost so much of that. And again, my job as a professor is to try to remind people that our own existence is completely linked to how we are treating our own land. So I have to think it's not lost. And I have to think that it's our job to try to bring it back. But it's easy to shut it down, right? It's easy to kind of just go about your day worried about what is it directly in front of you, and understand that, look, I know the forest is somewhere out there. I know that people might be cutting it down. But for me, I have to pay my bills. I have to put the food on the table at the end of the day. I have to get to this meeting. I have to get to run my errands. And so on a day-to-day basis, it's so important for people to remember to stop and try to reconnect with their communities, whether that's their ecological communities or their people communities or just their own self, right? And so I think I want to believe that it's not lost and that traditional land management is not lost. And I know it's not in much of the world. Here in New Jersey, it takes an effort. And it really, I do see that I'm inspired by some of my students. I just before here came from another talk that we have people talking about environmental justice issues in Newark and how the incinerators there are affecting, asthma rates and humanity's survival rates. And right. So you can imagine in a place where people can't even breathe the air without worry that they're feeling disconnected from their environment completely. But yet there's never been a better time to explain that connection between humanity and their environment as there is now.
I think, and I agree with you, I think Tom and I are both optimistic, even though I feel that there's a percentage of people in this world that sacrifice their connectivity for the sake of progress, I guess you would say. But I've met so many incredible ecologists just in the state of New Jersey alone that I know can make a difference, and all those little things make a difference, and it's just a little reminder. What are some ways that people can help rediscover their connection with nature? What are some tips that you would give to help people back on the way to that?
I think about this question all the time. How do we reconnect, right? How do we help to establish that reconnection? And I will say, maybe it's because of my mom, but it's also because of me. and where I live, I love hosting river cleanups and park cleanups.
Yep.
And I think just going out. So I want to be able to say, just go for a hike. But you know what? People are not as inclined to go for a hike if they've never gone for a hike before. But if you say, hey, come to our park cleanup, it's a park where they've been for so long and they've been noticing garbage on the ground for so long. Being a part of a cleanup, of a community-based cleanup, is really, really important for so many reasons. One, well, you're making a difference on the ground. But two, you're seeing how your actions directly affect your park or your river, whether it's for the better or for the worse, right? So I think understanding that you have a power and a responsibility to clean up your mess is one of the most important lessons that could also foster that wake up, that could basically say, okay, I am part of this environment. Yes, so that is, I would say, take part in cleanups. And if you can't find a cleanup, we have 20 of them going on, right? So they're everywhere. And I think that that's a very important move. New Jersey Clean Communities is a great group that just actually coincidentally moved to Kane's campus, and they have funding for each town in New Jersey to have cleanups to enforce litter abatement, to try to stop people from littering to begin with, and to educate people about litter. So that's one. Number two is, yes, to go outside, to hike, to explore, to do something that's fun, that really allows you to make your own observations. Because it's one thing to be taught and to watch documentaries, but it's another thing to experience it yourself. So whether that means going for a very slow walk around your neighborhood park, or whether that means getting lost in the woods and kind of hoping to, find your way home after a couple of hours or 3 hours, but really kind of not caring where the trail takes you. I think everybody needs to try to find a way that they feel comfortable connecting with nature, but also to learn, right? So just keep an open mind and see that there are, as you said, that we have so many terrific ecologists in New Jersey. I am blown away by that. And so there are so many people who have lessons to share and perspectives that could enrich everybody's lives.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I was going to say, cleaning up is really such a great way to one, get outside and experience nature, but also say, oh yeah, we really need to not let our trash blow around. Yeah. It's one of the things I just saw before we started. Duke Farms had put up a post about deer antlers. And I know this sounds crazy that I'm talking about deer antlers, just talk about trash. Yeah. One of the things I always like to do, and I talked about it on the podcast before, I'll go out and look for dropped deer antlers. It's called shed hunting. But there's a movement going on now when people do that, say, hey, pick up the trash you see while you're doing this. And I think the hashtag is called Tines and Trash. So I started doing that, and I've found 2 deer antlers over 3 years, but I've picked up 10 or 20 bags of trash along the way. And I'm getting outside, awesome. I'm experiencing nature. Yeah. The stuff that you pull out of the wackiest places too. You're in the middle of the woods and there's just all of a sudden this beach chair that's been there for who knows how long. Yeah. It's how
we had found it all.
Yeah, how did this get here? And actually, it's Davy Tree, right? Amy Green, who's been on the podcast, but her former company, they had I think they still have a shelf of all the weird and wacky stuff.
There's old found. Toys and
all these doll heads and all this wacky stuff that they find.
It's a little creepy
at these restoration sites, and it's at the end of the day, it's trash that ended up there.
Yeah. It reminds me of the stuff in Sid's room in Toy Story, it's that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But that's, I guess, what I'm getting at. It doesn't matter if you're that's just how I do it. But even if you're just taking a hike or just say, hey, you know what, I'm going to check out it's a great way to make friends too. Yeah. I think it was one of our former coworkers who her husband, I think, made a whole group of friends because he was at a park and just started picking up trash on his own.
Exactly.
And then all these other people said, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm picking up trash. And they just started doing it as well. And they got to be really good friends. And
amazing. It's great. And that's an important point, Tom. It doesn't have to be an organized event, right? We all kind of might have a hand or two to lend to this. And really, when you're walking, all you have to do is bend down to pick up litter as opposed to contribute to it. And I think that that's key. We had a garbage patch. So I live by a park that people think is clean, right? It's got a 3-mile walking loop. Everybody thinks it's relatively clean. But if you look into the woods just a little bit, there's a garbage dam, right? There's debris that's fallen. And so a river runs through it and just all of the garbage from miles around just accumulates there. So one day I just posted on Facebook. I was like, hey, I need to tackle this dam. Anyone with me? And we had 20 or so volunteers within an hour, and the whole patch was gone. And so I think that that's really very, very important to kind of just know that it's up to us. All of us can make that difference, right? Whether it's just on our walks or in organized events, it's really important to kind of make sure that we clean up our own environment.
We always go for a walk through our development on trash night because my wife will pick up trash the whole way and then deposit it in the trash cans. So it's not, she doesn't have to bring a bag. It's like, that's always a big walk night. So we can deposit, we're on recycling night, so we can do that. I'm going to bring this around to native plants because we always do. But before I do, I just want to expand on your call to action. That I appreciate your call to action. I kind of feel that everyone has a responsibility, but those that enlighten maybe isn't the right word, but those that know better have more responsibility. And I love that you spearhead those. Tom just recently asked me if I was interested in writing an article for a newsletter for someone, and I was like, I don't really have a good idea. And it made me think. I reflected upon my time here, and I'm like, I've been here 15 years, and over 15 years, I probably had a hand in supplying 30 million plants to restorations.
Wow. Unbelievable.
But if you were to ask my family or friends, like, they don't know the nursery I work for, what we do, the projects that we supply. It doesn't mean anything to them. Like, it's good, but it doesn't reach them. I preach to the choir with that. Like, my colleagues know and they get it and they understand. But if I mention Doug Tallamy to them, they all know who he is, but they don't know him because of the students that he influenced or the research papers that he did or any of this incredible restoration work. They know Nature's Best Hope. And because he managed to reach a larger audience. And I kind of reflected going, I feel like our best work, even though we've done all this great work, is reaching a larger audience with this podcast. And we all kind of have a responsibility to reach a larger audience.
Yeah. Yeah. I just had a conversation with Andrew Bunting, who I had never met before in my entire life. We have him on the podcast. I've seen him 4 times since then. But
the director of the Pennsylvania Horticulture.
Yes, exactly. But I was talking to him and saying, hey, I come to these like plant events, and it's just the conversations I'm having about plants are just so way over my head in some cases. And I feel like the dumbest person in the room because all these people know plants way better than I ever could even like dream of knowing them. And then I'll go home or I'll go to another kind of event or like I go to a hunting club dinner or a lacrosse game, and I'm like, I know more about plants than anyone here. And like I don't even know how to dumb it down enough to talk to them about plants. And it's like, how do we have that big of a gap in not just knowledge about plants, but knowledge about nature and ecology and restoration ecology and all this stuff? And it's like, how do you get that circle? How do you make it so that people can understand even what you're talking about sometimes?
And actually what you're saying is really, it rings so true to me. Because as I talk, like I love exploring everything a little bit, right? So I'm not a completely genius at any one factor of ecology. And so I always have so much to learn from so many people. Whenever I walk into a room, there's always people who know, especially at a conference or at work, there's going to be someone who needs to teach me everything about something that I thought I knew, right? But it's so important to kind of share our own knowledge and our own perspectives. And so I really do appreciate learning from people who become so obsessed with one question or one system or one methodology, because they could hopefully share it with me. I'll never be an expert in that area as they are. But at the same time, I could then communicate that to my own students or to my own friends and family and kind of spread the ideas and the concepts. And I think there's a very important role that this podcast plays, but also that books that are written for the general public play. I was very fortunate. So my master's degree was with an amazing woman named Dr. Robin Wall-Kimmerer. And she is, when I had her as a professor at SUNY ESF, she was tenure track and brand new, and I was a brand new student, and I was very fortunate to meet her. I knew immediately she was special. I thought I wanted to maybe study whales or animals, and then I had one class with her, and I was like, nope, I'm a botanist. And she's a Native American, and I was like, I'm an ethnobotanist. And then, once she wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, which has become an unbelievable book and Times bestseller and won so many awards, she was able to take the messages that she brought to the classroom and spread them around the world. Mm-hmm. And now that book is being read everywhere. Yeah. And I'm so proud of her for having that ability to take this unbelievable wisdom and insight and write it so eloquently in a way that really touched people's souls around the world. And I think that that's key. And that's important for scientists to do. It's important for everybody to be able to do, to be able to communicate the importance of their field. And it's not so important to be the best scientist in your field or the best plant ecologist or the best whatever it is, as it is so much more important to be able to communicate it to the rest of the society.
Well, not only did she touch your life, you kind of touched her life because she mentions you in the book. So it goes both ways. It goes both ways, but that's a perfect example because when I have, not everyone wants to hear it from me either, like in my life. And I was just joking with Tom recently, having our yard a certified wildlife habitat. We started getting National Wildlife Federation's Wildlife magazine, and my wife read it from front to back and was so excited to tell me about these stories. I'm like, this is what I do for a living, right? Like I've tried to tell you this, but you didn't really, she didn't want to hear it from me, but she was fascinated to write it. And I've taken that message where every time I have a friend or family member that tells me that they're interested in native plants, I don't talk to them about it. I send them a copy of Braiding Sweetgrass. I've probably given somewhere between 15 to 20 copies I've given out. And
wow.
I feel that message will better reach them that way than if I try to tell it. Because for me, it's preaching. From the book, it's not. And it's sometimes like I feel like at least I was able to recognize that they don't want to hear it from me. Because my wife's telling me about horseshoe crabs and red knots. I'm like, yeah, I know.
But it's awesome that she's telling you because now she's excited about it and kind of wanting to pass on the message.
Exactly. And I hope it goes beyond me. I hope she continues to spread that message. But okay, back to native plants. I'll get us back. So the one thing I love is that native plants are a buzzword right now, and people are planting them, and they're thinking about native pollinators and wildlife habitat, all these wonderful things. And they're doing it to help these things. But I think there's that connection missing that they're also helping themselves. How important are native plants to us as humans?
Wow. I will say very. Very.
Okay.
So we could look historically and we could look at it now as well, right? So historically, obviously, cultures have evolved with using the plants that were available to them and kind of tended to those plants and to the plants tended to them. So the idea was obviously using native plants for medicine, for food, for baskets, for ceremony, right? And so traditionally, there are a lot of our traditions that have evolved with native plants. Now, what we're seeing is that our native plants are important for us in so many other ways. So again, our plants have evolved in this habitat, right? So they are well adapted to our soil conditions, to our climatic conditions, to whether they're coastal plants, whatever their environment is. And so by having a diversity of plants, we're able to kind of make sure that not only are we taken care of, but the animals around us are as well. One of the ideas that we're working with now are these microforests they're called Miyawaki forests because they're based out of a planting style that is from Japan. And the idea is to take at least 30 different species of native trees and plant them so densely together in sites that are in urban or abandoned lots. And that way you could basically bring back a lot of our native biodiversity. You could help with stormwater absorption and clean the air and all that. And so the idea is that our native plants are going to be able to survive here in a way that we want them to, but also because they are native to this area, they should be able to. And so we're using this tool to kind of try to, again, bring back our native plant diversity to urban areas where we might not have the same native plant diversity that we did just a few decades ago. And so they are very effective at taking care of us in a way that we've abused in the past. And so I think that it's our time and responsibility to try to take care of them now. And this sort of idea of restoration and kind of reinstalling these native species to places where they have been extirpated is incredibly important. Now, again, because we are facing overdevelopment everywhere in this state, unfortunately. So, I think they're very important. In addition to all of the ecological functions that they provide for the systems, they're also important because of the services that they provide to us. And likewise, it's our job to serve them.
I was unaware of that process you spoke about until like 3 or 4 years ago. One of our clients had a customer that they did this on their private estate. It was someone who had made their fortune in the computer industry and fell in love with this process and completely converted their entire property over in Pennsylvania near the New Hope area. So it was really interesting to learn about it because his customer was so thrilled to talk about it and what he had learned and what he was doing. And to see someone that excited for restoration was really, really fun, actually.
Yeah.
I think one way that we can all help with our connection is with native plants in our own yard. Not just nature doesn't have to be somewhere you visit. It could be somewhere, it should be somewhere just outside your door. What are some, if you had to name like one native plant for medicinal value that everyone should know, or one native plant for food value? Look, I know it's locally, we're talking more in our region. Like, if you had to plant one for food and one for medicine, what?
Great question. So, first I have a sweetgrass patch outside my house. I have a very small yard, but the first thing we did was we established a sweetgrass patch, and I love the sweetgrass patch. Sweetgrass is mostly, again, it's a sacred plant. So to me too, but so it's not necessarily a medicinal in terms of ingestion, although people have taken tinctures of it, which I don't, or spray. But I'll go with I would love to have elderberry, our native elderberry, on our property. I think it's an amazing antiviral. We saw a boom in it with COVID. I think it's awesome. But also, I have to say, we have almost all of us. If you have any patch of green outside in your neighborhood, I'm guessing you have broadleaf plantain there. Broadleaf plantain is an amazing medicinal plant. It's not necessarily one that we would ever think, but I have gotten stung by bees so many times outside, and all I have to do is reach down and get a broadleaf plantain and crush it up and put it on the sting, and it really works as an anti-inflammatory, and it helps to heal the wound and to take the pain away, which is amazing. And so I think that we often overlook things like dandelions, which are great sources of food and nutrients that are outside almost all of our homes. Broadleaf plantain as well. So I think we could really take advantage by just opening our eyes to what's already there. And then, yes, if we want to plant some native species, there's no shortage of awesome medicinal plants that we could bring in.
Awesome. Yeah. I love that you mentioned elderberry, because any plant that can check off, like you can fry the flowers to eat, you can... the medicinal value or the antioxidant values, they're edible, and you can make a liqueur out of it. Pretty high on my list.
Someone wine too, apparently. Way, so.
Exactly.
Someone I was talking to made a pie. Maybe it was in the Facebook group. They made a pie with it was elderberry mixed with some other berries. But it sounded really good. It's something I wanted to try.
I feel like it's a great opportunity to get together.
Elder liqueur is next on my list to make.
One of my
elder hooch.
One of my favorite moments of our podcast all time was actually when we asked that question to Sam Thayer or a similar question to Sam Thayer, and his answer was pokeweed because I was not expecting that.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh yeah, it'll grow almost anywhere, and you can cook it, and you have to cook it to eat it." But I'd always heard it was poisonous, and I guess it is poisonous unless you blanch it for a certain amount of time, and then you can cook it different ways. And I tried it this last year; it was really good, and it's like, man, I can just go outside and just find all this stuff I can eat, like instead of the grocery store. Now, this time of year is a little bit harder, but
well, let me ask you this, Tom. Since you have done that,
Yeah.
how has that changed your? I know you have a specific connection with nature due to hunting and fishing and outdoor activities. How has that changed your connectivity with nature?
Oh, it's just a lot more fun. I really enjoy cooking. So that's a lot of it. Is I love trying new ingredients in different ways. So I haven't made any gumbo yet. My goal was to either hunt enough rabbits or get some a deer and then make a gumbo with the filet powder that I made from sassafras leaves. But I haven't done it yet. I wasn't very successful. But it gives you like a different relationship. We kind of talked about the importance of native plants to humans, and you really don't have to go back far in U.S. history until like that was. You weren't going to IKEA. You were going and making furniture and your house and everything. All of your possessions came off the land, and it was either made from plants or made from something that ate plants. And now we are so spoiled that I guess realistically it's all coming. Well, now we have plastic, so that's the cheat code, I guess. But like if you're getting even particle board furniture, it came from plants in a roundabout way. Now it's been processed 20 different ways, where before it was literally you were making it yourself a lot of times, or a relative or someone in very close proximity was making it for you. So it kind of brings some of that back, where it's like you have that idea of self-sufficiency, even though I'm still using butter I got from the grocery store and like all the other ingredients, but that one or two things is something I harvested myself.
But even Sam Thayer, his was born out of like a reason of self-sustainability because he had a bad home life as a child and didn't want to go home and would just find things to eat in nature. But I enjoyed having Tom bought hickory oil and fruit roll-ups made out of chokeberry and all those things that were like, why isn't this like just standard? Like, why can't I just go into a store and get this? Or why can't I do this? Like, it's something you don't see and it seems so unique. But when you have it and you're like, this is really good. Like, I don't understand how we lost this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's interesting, though, because oftentimes the connection that you're feeling then when you are going out and you're harvesting your own plants, right? It's not something that you necessarily do want to sell to the mass market because that could change all the ecosystem tremendously and the plant populations and also that connection. So there's something really special about being able to be sufficient, whether or not it might not be totally self-sufficient, but getting, some ingredients to add to your salad from nature is amazing, right? Or to flavor your soup or to do whatever. So I think really kind of making sure that any of that connection could be made is pretty special. And I do like hunters have that, right? They have an appreciation for their meat that the rest of us who might have to go to the grocery store and just buy it don't have, because you kind of form that relationship with that animal.
What is your and I'm not asking yet what your favorite native plant is, but what is your favorite thing to do with a native plant? Like, is it something that you eat or something that you use for medicine or you craft with? Is there something that you enjoy where you have a good connection with?
I do. So we have, I teach medicinal botany at Keene. Okay. And so, so I do like making medicine with my students. We're about to make a healing salve with plants. And usually, I could go out in the summer and see if I could find some St. John's wort and kind of collect the St. John's wort, and kind of the plantain as well and dry it. And then we make a healing salve out of it. And so the students could kind of see that it's something that we could take from nature, the ingredients, and also treat ourselves. And I really like doing that. So it's not just for me, but it's also sort of part of the education. I think that's really important. So yeah, awesome. I am not as much of a forager as I wish I was, because I I mean, there are some things, of course, I could forage, no problem. I love wineberries. Wineberries have to be like my favorite invasive or non-native species. It's pretty awesome because they're delicious and you have to eat them right there. You can't just, you can't really package them. So I do like kind of foraging for some ingredients too. But I think that really, for me, the fun comes in the medicinal botany.
Actually, foraging is actually ruined. Like the first time I foraged for blackberry, I've never been able to achieve that same taste from a store-bought blackberry. So every time I get blackberries, I'm hoping that they taste like that, and they never do.
And they never do.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's an invasive. The Himalayan blackberry is invasive in Seattle. So I moved here from Seattle, and holy cow! Like I loved that invasive species. Right? It's like 3 amazing berries wherever you go.
It's amazing. It's amazing. All right, I'm going to shift again, and
Sure.
I want to kind of talk a little bit just about philosophy since your time in academia. So,
Okay.
From the time that you entered academia to today, how do you feel that the practices of land management or sustainability have changed?
So I've been here 17 years, and I do remember coming in and teaching ecology. I was hired to teach ecology for the biology department, and I remember saying to my students back in 2006, 2007, that we were going to run out of oil in their lifetime, or easily accessible oil, and that we had to find another way to power our lives. And nobody believed me. The students were like, "You're nuts, right?" There's at that point, Hummers were coming along soon. Like we were not moving in that direction at all. So it's been interesting to see since then how much more widely accessible sustainable designs are and sustainable lifestyles are. I think that I came in as a lone wolf. Again, I moved from Seattle, where I was surrounded by people who were really passionate about the environment. And when I moved here, there were 2 things. One, it wasn't as widely acceptable. But 2, I also didn't have that network of ecologists that I do have now here in New Jersey. So I didn't know that I would have a community to kind of pull from. And so I was pretty sad, but also pretty empowered, right? So I was like, okay, this stinks, but it's up to me to put these recycling bins on campus. And it's up to me to start an environmental science class or program. So we had no environmental programs at all at Kane when I started. And so I think it's been awesome to have it to the point now where we have a whole department where we have I'm working with an amazing group of colleagues. And now environmental science is a major that not only do we offer, but almost every university offers it. And so I think it's been amazing to kind of see that evolution over the past 17 years. But we have to, we're at the same time, I was teaching about climate change 17 years ago and people were not seeing it. They weren't able to visualize that it was happening all around them already. Now, gosh, we're seeing it everywhere, right? We're seeing signs of climate change everywhere, especially here in New Jersey. We could talk about ghost forests along the coastline. We could talk about the fact that it's 60 degrees this week in February, and this is the warmest, unbelievable. The 8 of the 10 warmest years have been, or 8 of the warmest years on record have been in the past 10 years. We are surrounded by evidence now, whereas 17 years ago, we weren't as much. And so I think there's more of a knowledge, there's more of an inherent concern, but I'm also waiting for people to kind of want to dedicate their entire lives to it, right? So I don't want people to kind of just assume that someone else is going to take care of all these problems. It's up to all of us to do that. And so I'm still fighting the fight, but at least now I have a posse with me.
How has your student changed over the year? What you would consider like your average student? How has that changed? Are they coming in already knowing that this is what they want to do? Are they dipping their toes? Are they more educated already coming in? Has it changed from more male to female? Are you seeing differences in that way?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. So one, we are a Hispanic serving institution. We have a very high proportion of students who are first generation U.S. A lot of people who come to Kane are the first people in their family to ever go to college. And so there's a lot of pressure on these kids. I'll call them kids, even though they're not kids anymore, but there's a lot of pressure on them to succeed in life. And it used to be, the assumption was, and I will say, when I started, most people wanted to be doctors or physical therapists if they were in the sciences, because they knew that they thought there were jobs there, and they wanted to make a lot of money, and they wanted to make a big living. I think now we're seeing much more of an awareness of the opportunities that there are in environmental science, specifically sustainability, in the sense that we have a lot of students who are now minoring in sustainability, even if they don't want to necessarily go into it. We have a lot of people who are now wanting to incorporate sustainability and environmental science into their jobs. So maybe they're majoring in business or political science or psychology or biology, and they just want to understand a little bit more. Oh, and we have a lot of architecture and design students as well. So I think we're seeing that people generally are understanding that sustainability and environmental science feeds into so many different disciplines. You don't have to only major in environmental science. There's I would say there's probably a 60% female to male ratio now, and I think that's been pretty consistent. What I truly treasure about my profession, or about my job here at Kane, is that it's an incredibly diverse student population. And I love looking at a classroom of my students and seeing that no one looks alike. I think that's unbelievable. And so in my medicinal botany classes, for example, we each present a plant. Every single student has to present on a plant that is important to their own culture. Right. And so they bring in samples of these plants. They talk about their family recipes. They talk about their treatments. And so they connect their own cultural identity of their plants to the rest of the class. And even if they've been, even if their family has been here for a while, they actually interview their parents or their grandparents about plants that are important for them. I think it's so much fun. We actually wind up doing assays with them to run it against bacteria and fungi to see if these plants have antimicrobial properties. And it's kind of empowering for them to see that they could put science behind their family traditions. Mm-hmm. So I think my student population is pretty unique, and I am incredibly grateful for that. And it always has been. I think now it's a little bit easier to try to convince them to incorporate environmental science into their career paths.
I love that. I love hearing that, because for the longest time, being in it as long as I have, that wasn't the case, 35 years ago. And
right.
And that is so wonderful to hear that you're witnessing that and experiencing. And that sounds like a fantastic class. I may have to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Can we audit?
Can we?
Yeah, please.
So personally for you, after being a part of it for now 2 decades, how has your belief in restoration or ecology changed over your tenure? How do you still think of it the same way? Is it more hopeful than it was? Do you feel that we're making progress, or do you feel as if like we're not there yet?
So
regardless how much you love something, it can wear you down.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting, because when I came in, my restoration world was all about, I don't have a lot of indigenous people here in New Jersey, or at least in this part of New Jersey, to work with. And so I wound up focusing on invasive species. And that quickly changed. Now we're looking at a lot of resiliency planning and a lot of resiliency sort of restoration projects that will help to restore maritime forests, will help to restore Atlantic white cedar swamps, things that are in danger because of climate change, and really play an important role in protecting our native diversity from rising sea levels. And I did not anticipate it happening as quickly as it is. And so I think that that's really one of the biggest shifts, has been to see, okay, I can't afford to not address this major threat to our biodiversity and to our coastline and to our society here in New Jersey. And I think that that's really what's happening. I also think that it's been awesome to see how many groups are uniting, right? So I'm on so many different discussion groups and task forces and boards and things that where people are kind of trying to figure out how to address this, climate change or the lack of biodiversity or stormwater or, and flooding issues. So people are really kind of trying to get together their shared concerns and do something about it. So we're seeing that more. Unfortunately, it comes because our threats have become escalated over the past 2 decades. And so we're seeing that we can't afford for ecology to not be applied anymore in this manner.
I think, and as you're just another example, I feel everyone that we interview that is meant to do this for a living and loves it from the bottom of their heart. And I feel as though this profession chose us. We didn't necessarily choose it. It kind of, everyone we talk to has a very interesting story how they got here, and it wasn't necessarily a straight path. I don't think anyone we talked to, it was a straight path.
Oh, no. They all wanted to do something different first. Yes. I can't think of anyone. I'm sure we've had, 75 guests now or so. There had to have been someone who was like, oh, yeah, this is what I dreamed of doing forever. It always seems like it was like, oh, I went to go do this, and then I met this person, or I had this life event, or I had this class, and I diverted. And sometimes that diversion is like 3 or 4 times. And
then they're great at it, and then they're so passionate. You can't imagine this person doing anything other than what they're doing. Yeah. And
yes, except I want to interrupt you right there because life is, if you're lucky, pretty long, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, now what do I want to be when I grow up, right? Like, it's like, okay, so now, right, you're constantly like looking for that other sort of excitement area. So it's like, how can I take this knowledge and skills and maybe redirect it, right? So I think we all kind of continue to grow. And so I don't want to think of life as having an endpoint once we finally get a job.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays, so many people are changing jobs so many times in their lives and continuing to grow throughout their careers. I have a friend who just retired from being a biology professor and is now, working at a spa and loving it. And he's like, this is what I've been needing to do my whole life. Right. So I think we all kind of have to figure out, what stage of life we're in and how do we figure, the best way to kind of be happy now and make a difference now, and then use that to kind of propel our future steps.
Well, we joke about this all the time in the office because I know how many years I am away from retirement. Like it's I'm a lot closer than it is behind me. So what do you want to be when you grow up? That's your next question.
Big question. I don't know yet. Right? I think that's kind of exciting, right? So what is the next step going to be? There's so many. I don't want to think that, that this is it. I've done it. Right. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm very content. I'm not looking to leave it to change things. But, with my research, with my, project areas, there's always more I want to learn about and I always want to grow. Oh, yeah. And so I think it's exciting to know that there hopefully will be a future where I could explore more opportunities.
I think I can speak for Tom in this too, is that like when we started the podcast, we didn't know that this was like an option. Like we didn't know that it could turn into what it was. And I feel my personal growth as far as, personally and as far as in the field of ecology has quadrupled since the podcast has started, more so than the previous 12 years here, that growth has been exponential in the last 3 years. And you go, well, what else can we do to continue that growth and continue that reach and to make a bigger difference? You feel like, oh, we can do more. Like, although I don't know, there's not enough time in the
You're doing a great job.
Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't say that in front of my boss. That I can do. I can do more. I can do more.
Bring it on.
What does get tricky with all of this, and I'm sure you're in the same boat, is as we learn more and more about ecology and restoration ecology and ecosystems, habitats, and how all this stuff works, built onto what we already knew, it's really hard to turn a blind eye to it and forget it. And it's like those conversations I was saying, how do you make it so that everyone can understand? It's like it's really hard to just talk about the one thing they need to talk about, or they asking you about, without tying it into. They're asking, oh, what would be a good native plant for my yard? And then you start talking about invasive plants, and then all the damages they do, and then this, and then, like, it all adds up. That's one of the things I couldn't see myself in another field, because I'll constantly know what's happening here and why it's so important and why we should be working with native plants or against invasive plants.
Well, the funny thing was, when my wife was reading that wildlife magazine, there was a whole article about roadways for bobcats due to forest defragmentation due to highways. And I was like, and we ended up in a whole deep conversation of what predators and prey both need to survive and why it's important. Like, it just went on a whole different level, and it's like, I'm glad we could have that conversation, because if I was just going to try to have that conversation, that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Hey, let's talk about predator and prey. All right. Just for the sake of time, we're at the point where it's our last question. It's always our last question. It's the most simple yet hardest question that we ask. And that is, what is your favorite native plant?
Native to New Jersey, I'm going with turkey beard. It is an amazingly fun lily that lives in the understory of the pine barrens. If you see it most of the year, it looks like grass, so it's very deceiving that way. And then if a fire comes by, within 2 years, you've got this amazing display of white flowers that are just unbelievable. I love turkey beard. It is a member of the Xerophyllum genus, and the only other member of it is called beargrass, and it's in the Pacific Northwest. And that's what I did my dissertation research with. There were huge beargrass savannas in the Pacific Northwest, and it's a major basketry plant for the tribes out there. So when I moved here, immediately I called Amy DeVito, who I heard was, the eco czar here, and basically said, I need to find this Xerophyllum species. Do you know it? And he showed me this amazing patch of it, and I've been obsessed with turkey beard ever since.
When you mentioned coming to New Jersey and then meeting other ecologists that you can learn from, he was the name that popped into my head, because I've learned so much from him.
And I think I found him totally because of this. I knew the only thing I knew about turkey beard, because again, I was obsessed with beargrass for, the 4 years of my dissertation. So I knew it had a cousin that lived in New Jersey. I knew the cousin lived, meaning turkey beard. I knew that it lived in the Pine Barrens, and I knew that I needed to see it. So everybody who I spoke to was like, well, then you need to talk to Emil. And I'm really glad I did. We've been friends for 17 years, and he's completely, one of my biggest influences here. But yeah, he still has me saved on his phone as Daniela Turkey Beard because of that.
And I'm just looking up pictures. There's so many of these plants that I'm not familiar with.
I was going to say, you threw us both for a loop, because Tom and I looked at each other like, I don't know this plant.
And I looked it up, and I'm like, I'm going to have to go and find this.
With turkey beard, I love turkey beard. It is an amazing plant, and I have not been able to grow it from seed. So if you guys, this is like, people have been able to grow it from seed outside. I want to try to grow it from seed in controlled environments, because I want to see if, just like its cousin, beargrass, I want to see if I could accelerate its germination rates by exposing it to fire or to smoke or to ash, kind of signs of fire, because it is a fire-adapted species, just the same way its cousin beargrass is. So I'm trying to manipulate it, and it's a hard nut to break. I mean, it's pretty fun. It's a big challenge for me.
So many of those pine barren species, which grow obviously so naturally in those conditions, are so hard to replicate, like bearberry and sweet fern are very difficult, but you can go to the pine barrens and see bearberry in large patches under pines, and you're like, oh, this should be easy, and it's not. And I'm wondering if turkey beard is one of those things that needs a symbiotic relationship with something else. Because if it's very specific conditions where you're finding it.
Very specific mycorrhizal species all over there. It could very well be. I've tried to grow it in the soil, in the sand of the pine barrens, but in controlled environments, have not been able to. It's rhizomatous, so it does, also grow through rhizomes, but It's an amazing plant, and I just love that it's so deceiving that people just assume it's a grass until it flowers, and I think that's really kind of fun.
I think we all need to go on a field trip.
I agree.
Yeah. All right.
Just looking at that grass like foliage at the bottom, I feel like I've seen this plant. I just had never seen it blooming. I have a spot
and when it blooms,
where I'm going to go take a look.
Yeah, we bloomed. So with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, we've been I've been setting up some research plots and kind of tracking its flowering rates after fires, and it's awesome. When it is on full display, you've got a massive stand of turkey beard, and those white flower puffs are just unlike anything you've ever seen.
Cool.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, I appreciate you introducing us to a new, or not a new native plant, but a native plant that we were unaware of, because now I will be on a mission to find this plant. So now, fantastic choice. So we always kind of end the show with final thoughts. And this is where we hand the floor over to you. You can use the time however you want. If you want to summarize, promote something, mention something that we didn't touch on, you're more than welcome. We hand it over.
Oh my goodness. You know what? And I just want to thank you guys, because I really think that you're doing such an amazing service by sharing your knowledge and your wisdom, but also inviting people to share their own perspectives. And I guess for everybody listening, go outside, explore, and find people to kind of teach and pass on your passion of nature to, because it's really important that we spread the knowledge and concern for the environment with everybody else.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Although I feel like we're really just having our guests pass on their knowledge. I feel more like Alec Trebek.
Yeah.
You know, like he's not winning Jeopardy, but he's a good host.
Yeah, he definitely left his mark, and that's a really important thing.
Yes. So, Tom, do you want to go or you want me to go?
Yeah, I can go first, Fran.
Sure.
First, I need to say happy anniversary, Fran.
Happy anniversary
to you. This is our 3-year anniversary.
It is our 3-year anniversary.
Tomorrow being Saturday, the day after Friday when this releases, is our 3-year anniversary of doing this.
Well, I was going to do it on the buzz. I have a special drink for us.
I did it sooner. So
all right,
I beat you to it. I'll still have the drink.
Thank you.
But,
happy anniversary.
My real final thought this time is right after the Super Bowl, we were talking about like football and coaching trees and all these. And now I think this episode and then our next episode are like kind of the start of some of these coaching trees. I guess we had that with Stanley Temple too, where he's in the Aldo Leopold coaching tree and
the Rachel Carson.
The Rachel Carson coaching tree. And then but you're in the Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer coaching tree, and now you're starting your own coaching tree as well.
Yes.
So we're seeing that.
So it's very we're going to have to actually outline that. We'll put
it was like that whole concept of how people tend to be connected through one person. Like there's one key connector who really just inspires a whole bunch of people. And that concept of, think about your friend group and how many of them are actually your friends, or how many of them are just, that's my friend Johnny's friend. I met all these people who are my friends now through this one person, and that one person was the connector. But that's kind of happening. I'm seeing it more and more in ecology, where there's some key people who all of a sudden have a whole wave of their students or proteges or people they worked with that are now entering this field and making, like, just that ripple just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's cool to see.
Awesome. Great final thought. Mine is, just being a little reflective, retrospective. We keep talking about how we as professionals can make the circle bigger, or even as non-professionals, it's important to keep getting more people in, like-minded people, and bringing them in, so we have more of a culture, more of a community about it. But I can't help to keep thinking back inward to myself, saying I should be doing more. And it's funny how like that shifts every now and then. But right now I'm very proud of this podcast and what we've been able to accomplish over 3 years. And I hope there's more things like this that we can do to help reach a wider audience. So I know, I don't know. 3 years is quite an accomplishment.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Cool. So. Thank you. Well, that's going to wrap us up today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did you get us anything? Just your presence is the present. So, that's going to wrap us up for today. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'd enjoyed listening to Dr. Shebitz. Dr. Shebitz, do you have a website or anything that you want to plug here too? This is usually where I have like a little link to your research or anything for you, but we forgot to
you
ask
could always go to Kane, and we have our department's website, and I have my own up there as well.
Right.
But if anyone wants to reach out to me, it's dshebitz@kane.edu.
I'll list that in the show notes.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone, for listening to Native Plants, Healthy Planet, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
Thank you to the Egocentric Plastic Men for contributing our theme music. Make sure you stream or buy their songs wherever you consume your music. You can follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery, or NativePlants_Healthy Planet. And you can also follow us at YouTube at Pinelands Nursery. Do not forget about the question and comment line. You can call us at 215-346-6189. I will repeat, 215-346-6189. You can call and ask a question or leave a comment, and we will do our best to play it on a future episode of The Buzz and answer your question to the best of our ability. And don't forget about the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. That community just keeps growing. I think we're almost at 1,600, and the conversations have been great, and I'm really proud of the conversations everyone's been having there.
So you can buy Native Plants Healthy Planet merch at our website, www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. I've gotten good at saying that now, Fran. I'm really proud that I don't stutter over it like I used to.
I'm going to change it.
But, so you can buy that merch right at our website. There's a link right at the top. Takes you to our Teespring store. We do not keep a dime of the profits we make. We give it right back to organizations we feel are doing really good boots on the ground work. We still got to go visit Bowman's Hill with that check we have for them.
We do.
So we'll get out there now that things are going to start coming up. There's a little more inspiration to go out and visit Santino.
It's a good time to visit.
If as long like it wasn't like his him just being him wasn't enough for us.
Oh,
we
it's
needed
enough.
to see
It's
something
enough.
as well. That's just a little joke, Santino. Don't get mad at me. But so, like I said, all that money is going to go to those folks at the end of the day. And you can listen to Native Plants Healthy Planet again at our website, but you're probably going to listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, really wherever you consume your podcast. Do us a favor, leave a 5-star review, hit subscribe. That goes a long way into getting more people interested in hearing about native plants. With that, thank you, everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone. Dr. Shebitz, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate taking time out of your day to spend with us today. What a wonderful conversation. Next week, we have a Buzz episode, so make sure you tune in for that. And until then, keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.